Greetings from Brother Stephen. I'm a disciple and witness of Jesus Christ. To all the inhabitants of the earth, I present to you as a witness this gospel of the kingdom. This lesson, titled Feeding of the 4,000, we'll be going over Matthew chapter 15, verses 29 through 39. And like always, we're going to get right into the lesson. Matthew chapter 15, verse 29 says, And Jesus departed hence, and came near unto the Sea of Galilee, and went up into a mountain, and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, this means crippled, blind, dumb, means they was mute, they could not talk. Maimed means they was permanently wounded, either born permanently wounded or wounded after they was born. And many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them, insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, and the maimed to behold, and the lame to walk, and the blind to see. And they glorified the God of Israel. Now Mark chapter 8 verses 1 through 10 also gives a testimony of the feeding of the 4,000. So beginning at the first verse, it says, In those days the multitude being very great, and having nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples unto him, and said unto them, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have now been with me 3 days, and have nothing to eat. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him, and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they have continued with me now 3 days, and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, this means without food or drink, lest they faint in the way. And if I send them away fasting to their own houses, they will faint by the way, for divers, this just means many of them, came from far. And his disciples say unto him, Where do we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude? And the disciples answered Jesus, From where can a man satisfy these men with bread here in the wilderness? And he, referring to Jesus, asked them, How many loaves have you? And they said, 7. Verse 34, And Jesus said unto them, How many loaves have you? And they said, 7, and a few little fish. And a few little fishes. And he heard, and they had a few small fishes, and he blessed, and commanded to sit them also before them. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. He commanded the people to sit down on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and gave thanks, and brake, and gave to his disciples to sit before them, and they did sit them before the people. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. Now when we go back to the lesson titled The Feeding of the 5,000, which we covered in Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 21, verse 19 says, And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the grass, and he took the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up into heaven, he blessed and brake, and gave the loaves to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. So pretty much the same thing that was happening in Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 21, is the same thing happening here in this lesson. But just the quantity of the loaves and fish and the people is changed. When you go to verse 37, it says, And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up the broken bread that was left, 7 baskets full. So from just 7 loaves and a few fish, after everybody was done eating, there was still full 7 baskets of still full of food. So when we get to go back to Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 through 21. Again, this is the feeding of the 5,000. It says, And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up of the fragments that remained 12 baskets full. So when you go to Mark verse 8, it says, So they did eat, and were filled, and they took up the broken meat. This just means the food. This means the bread and the fish that was left, 7 baskets. And they that had eaten were about 4,000. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. So the 4,000 in this verse is only counting the men. It is not counting the women and the children. So it fed way more than 4,000. And you can see the same thing when you go back to the study, the feeding of the 5,000. In verse 20, it says, and they did all eat and were filled, and they took up the fragments that remained, 12 baskets full. And they that had eaten were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. And it says, and he sent them away. In other words, after they was full, so they were not fainting away. Verse 39 in Matthew says, and he sent away the multitude and took a ship and came into the coast of Magdala. And this is a Hebrew word. And I have here mapped the Sea of Galilee and approximately the location here of Magdala. Verse 10 says, and straightway he entered into a ship with his disciples and came to the parts of Dalmanutha. But in other words, Dalmanutha is approximately the same location as Magdala. But no one knows for sure exactly where Dalmanutha is today. But we can only assume that it is in the approximately as the same location as Magdala. So I want to go back to Luke chapter 5. And this is when Jesus calls his first disciples, because it's still dealing with fish appearing out of thin air. And we're going over these verses so we can figure out where does these fish come from that is appearing out of thin air. Verse 1 says, and it came to pass that as the people pressed upon him to hear the word of God, in other words, they came to hear the gospel of the kingdom, the same gospel that you are hearing today. He stood by the lake of Gennesaret. This is still the Sea of Galilee. And saw 2 ships standing by the lake. But the fishermen, in other words, this word fishermen, these mean they were commercial fishermen. They were not in a little bitty 8 men in a little bitty tiny boat that you see in most pictures today. It says they were gone out of them and were washing their nets. So in other words, this was a big ship, commercial fishermen. They was not in a little small boat. Verse 3 says, and he entered into one of the ships, which was Simon's, and prayed him that he would thrust out a little from the land. And he sat down and taught the people out of the ship. So in other words, again, they was on the ship. He thrust out a little bit off the shore, and he sat on either the front of the boat or the top of the boat, basically using it as a pulpit to preach the gospel to the people. It says, now, when he had done speaking, he said unto Simon, launch out into the deep waters, and let down your nets for a draught. This draught means a haul of fish. And Simon answering said unto him, Master, we have fished all night and have caught nothing. Nevertheless, at your word, I will let down the nets. And when they had done this, they caught a great multitude of fish. When they say a great multitude, they're talking about all kinds of fish, many fish. And their net break. And they beckon. Beckon means they just signal unto their partner. In other words, again, these are commercial fishermen. This is a business, which were in the other ship, that they should come and help them. And they came and filled both the ships, not one boat, not 2 small boats. They filled 2 ships so that they began to sink. So I have a picture here representing the 2 ships being full. It would be no miracle in filling a small boat. The miracle is that they filled 2 huge ships with fish. So again, the question is, where are these fish coming from? And we're going to answer that at the end of this lesson. It says, when Simon Peter saw it, he fell down at Jesus' knees, saying, "Depart from me, I am a sinful man, O Lord." In other words, he felt guilty for doubting Jesus' word. So now, where did these fish come from? In order to understand where these fish come from, you have to go to Genesis chapter 1, verses 20 through 23. It says, this is known as the 5th day, when God created fish and birds. It says, "In God," now you have to remember, in the beginning was Jesus, and Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God. This was Christ in the beginning. Said, "Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creatures that have life." And God created great whales, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind. And God saw that it was good. So in other words, all God did was speak, and the fish was created out of thin air. And God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters and the seas." So in other words, the same way he just created fish from nothing in the beginning, Christ was creating fish from nothing when he came here in the form of man. Christ is the same God in the beginning that created the heavens and the earth. When you go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3, it says, "Through faith," this means through hearing the scriptures, "we understand that the worlds, which is the heavens and the earth, were framed," this means made, created, "by the word of God. So the things which are seen," this means everything that exists, everything that we see with our natural eye. It says, "were not made of things." This means did not come or was made from another substance, from matter. It says, "which do appear." This means they did not evolve. They came from the word of God. They were created from nothing. And this concludes this message.